Before you move past this moment, listen carefully, because someone who has practiced 1,000 explanations in silence has finally realized that none of them matter unless they reach you. Your soulmate has been carrying a truth that changed shape every time they tried to speak it. At first, it sounded like an apology. Then it became a confession. Tonight, it became something more urgent, a choice that can no longer be delayed. They are alone in a quiet room, sitting near a window where the last light of evening has faded from the glass. A phone rests in their hand, your name visible on the screen, but their thumb has not touched the call button. The room is still except for the faint sound of a clock and the uneven rhythm of their breathing. They have opened your conversation 3 times. They have typed several messages. Each one was erased before it could be sent. The first message said, "I should have told you sooner." The second said, "You misunderstood why I disappeared." The third contained only 4 words, "It was never you." But there is a reason they cannot send such a small sentence. It does not hold enough of the truth. It cannot explain the night they made a decision that hurt you while secretly believing it was the only way to protect what remained of their own heart. It cannot reveal why they allowed you to think they cared less than they truly did. And it cannot undo the moment when your silence became heavier than any argument between you. You may have believed they moved on easily. Perhaps that is what their distance suggested. Perhaps you pictured them living normally, smiling without effort, forgetting the conversations that still replayed inside your own mind. But their absence was not peace. It was performance. Behind it was someone trying to convince themselves that losing you deliberately would hurt less than risking the possibility of being left by you later. That fear did not begin with you. Long before your paths crossed, they learned to expect love to change without warning. Someone once promised to remain and then disappeared emotionally while still standing in the same room. Another person made them feel that honesty could be used against them. So when your presence began to matter more than they planned, they did not feel only happiness. They felt danger not because you were dangerous, but because hope had become dangerous to them. And then you did something small that made everything real. It happened during a conversation you may barely remember. You noticed a change in their voice. They tried to dismiss it, but you did not rush them. You simply said, "You don't have to pretend with me." Those words stayed. They heard them later while driving home. They heard them while lying awake. They heard them on the day they decided to pull away. Your kindness had opened a door inside them, but instead of walking through it, they panicked at what waited on the other side. Because beyond that door was the possibility of being fully known, and they had spent years surviving by revealing only the parts of themselves they could control. There was something else they never told you. Shortly before the distance began, they received news that changed their confidence in the future. It was not a dramatic catastrophe, and it was not something meant to frighten you. It was a personal responsibility, one that made them question what they could offer, what promises they could keep, and whether bringing you closer would eventually make you carry a burden you never agreed to hold. They almost told you that evening. They had planned the entire conversation. They knew where they wanted to meet you. They had even imagined the expression on your face when they finally admitted how deeply attached they had become. But before they could reach out, something happened. A person close to them offered advice that sounded protective at the time. Do not involve them until you know what your life will look like, that person said. If you truly care, step back before they become trapped in your uncertainty. Your soulmate listened. That was the mistake. They confused love with deciding on your behalf. They told themselves they were saving you from disappointment, but they never gave you the chance to decide what you were willing to face. Instead of trusting your heart, they trusted their fear. They became distant without explanation, expecting you to somehow understand what they refused to say. Yet when you stopped reaching for them, they were shocked. They had imagined you would notice the pain hidden beneath their coldness. They had hoped you would insist, ask one more question, or break through the wall they had built. But you had your own wounds. Their silence looked like rejection, and you respected the message you believed they were sending. You stepped back not because you did not care, but because you could not keep begging for clarity from someone who acted as though your presence no longer mattered. That is the part they understand now. For months, they blamed timing. They blamed pressure. They blamed circumstances. But earlier today, they found something that stripped away every excuse. It was an old voice message from you. They had saved it without realizing it. Your voice entered the room unexpectedly, soft and unguarded, speaking from a time when you still believed the two of you could tell each other anything. You were not declaring love. You were not asking for promises. You were simply telling them that they did not have to face everything alone. The message ended, and the room became unbearably quiet. Your soulmate replayed it. Then they replayed it again. By the third time, they were no longer listening only to your words. They were hearing the trust they had failed to honor. They remembered how carefully you had treated the parts of them that others dismissed. They remembered how you never demanded perfection. And for the first time, they saw the full truth of what happened. You were not asking them to have every answer. You were asking them to let you stand beside them while they searched. That realization broke something open. They walked to the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Not because their face had changed, but because the story they had repeated for so long was collapsing. They had told themselves they left because they loved you. Now they could see that love was only part of it. They also left because they were afraid you might see all of them and decide they were too complicated to stay for. So they rejected themselves before you had the chance. But there is another layer to this truth, and it is the reason they feel they may be running out of time. Recently, they heard that your life might be changing. They do not know every detail. They only know that a new door may be opening for you, an opportunity, a move, or perhaps a person who sees the value they once failed to protect. The thought did not awaken jealousy as much as it awakened clarity. They realized that your heart cannot remain waiting in an unfinished chapter forever. For the first time, they understood that silence is also a decision. Every day they say nothing, they are choosing the possibility that you may never know. Every hour they hesitate, the version of the story you believe becomes more permanent. And the truth is, they can no longer bear the thought of you carrying the false belief that you were easy to leave. You were not easy to leave. They felt your absence in ordinary places. In the passenger seat where they once imagined you sitting. In grocery store aisles when they noticed something you would have liked. In the pause after good news, when their first instinct was still to tell you. Your absence was not one dramatic wound. It was 100 quiet moments with nowhere to go. Still, they remained silent because they believed too much time had passed. They thought reaching out might disturb your peace. They feared you would hear their confession as an attempt to pull you backward. But tonight, another thought has become stronger than that fear. What if your peace was built around a lie they allowed you to believe? That question is why their phone is still in their hand. They have stopped writing explanations. They have stopped trying to make themselves sound strong. Now they are preparing to tell you the truth without controlling what happens afterward. They know you may not respond the way they hope. They know forgiveness cannot be demanded. They know love does not erase consequences. But they also know you deserve the missing piece. Your soulmate is ready to tell you that the distance was never created by a lack of feeling. It was created because their feelings had become powerful enough to expose everything they had hidden even from themselves. You represented a future they wanted, and wanting it made them aware of how unprepared they felt to receive something real. Yet that is not the biggest revelation. There is one detail they have guarded more carefully than all the rest. Something happened on the final day before they withdrew completely. You may remember that day differently. You may remember a short reply, a cancelled plan, or a strange coldness in their voice. What you could not see was that they were holding something meant for you. A letter. They wrote it by hand because they could not trust themselves to say the words aloud. In that letter, they admitted what they wanted, what they feared, and what they had begun imagining for the two of you. They carried it for hours, intending to place it in your hands. But they never did. The letter was hidden away, unopened by anyone, and tonight they found it again beneath a stack of forgotten papers. The envelope still has your name written across the front. The ink is slightly faded, but the words inside remain exactly as they were on the day they lost their courage. They opened it moments ago. As they reached the final page, they discovered something they had forgotten: writing a promise to themselves about you. A promise that explains why they are suddenly willing to risk rejection, embarrassment, and every painful consequence of returning. Their hands began to shake when they read it. Because the final line was not merely a confession of love. It was a decision about the future. And now your soulmate has placed the letter beside the phone, taken one long breath, and pressed your name. But just before the call begins, they notice one final thing written on the back of the envelope, something added in a different ink, on a different day. A sentence that changes the meaning of everything inside. And in the next moment, they realize that someone else knew the truth before you ever did. My beloved child. The moment their eyes settled on the handwriting across the back of the envelope, the room seemed to lose every sound except the beating of their own heart. The ink was darker than the words on the front, written months later in a rush that only someone overwhelmed by emotion could have managed. It said, "If this letter is ever found after I lose the courage to deliver it, then let the truth finally be stronger than my fear." For several seconds, they simply stared at those words. They had no memory of writing them. It was as if another version of themselves, the one who still believed honesty could save what silence would eventually destroy, had left behind a final instruction for the person they would become. Suddenly, every excuse they had repeated over the passing months collapsed under the weight of one undeniable realization: they had known all along that silence was temporary. Deep inside, they had always intended to come back. The phone in their hand began to vibrate. Not because you were calling. Because another message had just arrived. It came from someone whose name they had not seen in a long time. The very person who had once advised them to step away before involving you in the uncertainty surrounding their life. The message was painfully simple. I've been thinking about what happened. I owe you an apology. Your soulmate hesitated before opening it. They almost ignored it, convinced that nothing written there could possibly matter anymore. But something urged them to keep reading. I believed I was protecting both of you. Looking back, I think I only protected fear. You deserved an honest conversation. So did they. There was no dramatic explanation. No attempt to erase the past. Just quiet accountability. For the first time, your soulmate realized something they had never admitted to themselves. They had spent months placing all responsibility on circumstances, timing, and outside advice because doing so felt easier than facing the harder truth that the final decision had always belonged to them. No one had forced them to stay silent. Fear had simply become more persuasive than hope. That realization did not crush them. It awakened them. They walked toward the window and watched the first stars appear against the deepening evening sky. Every light seemed distant, yet every one had survived the arrival of darkness. It reminded them of something you once said during an ordinary conversation neither of you realized would become unforgettable. Real things don't disappear just because we stop talking about them. At the time, you had been speaking about dreams. Now those words carried an entirely different meaning. Without realizing it, you had described the connection they had spent months trying to bury. The memories came flooding back, but not the obvious ones. They did not remember anniversaries or grand gestures. They remembered details so small that only genuine affection preserves them. The way you laughed before finishing a sentence because you already knew they would understand. The habit you had of looking toward the sky whenever you searched for the right words. The gentle pause before saying goodbye, as though neither of you wanted to be the first to end the conversation. Those moments had never left. They had simply been waiting beneath layers of regret. Your soulmate finally picked up the old handwritten letter again. This time, they continued reading beyond the place where they had stopped. Near the bottom of the second page, they discovered something that made them close their eyes. I don't need you to rescue me, the younger version of themselves had written to you. I only hope you'll know the real me before deciding whether I belong in your future. They covered their face with one trembling hand. That was all you had ever offered. The opportunity to be known without pretending. Yet they had hidden from the very acceptance they secretly longed to receive. Another memory surfaced. It was the final conversation before everything changed. You had asked a question that seemed ordinary. Is there something you're carrying that you haven't told me? There had been a pause. A long one. They remembered looking away. They remembered smiling instead of answering. And then they remembered something they had forgotten until this very moment. You had looked at them with quiet compassion and whispered, "Whenever you're ready, I'll listen." Not if. Whenever. You had already made space for the truth. They simply never stepped into it. A strange mixture of grief and gratitude settled over them. Grief for every unnecessary mile created by silence. Gratitude because your kindness had remained untouched inside their memory despite everything that followed. But another thought interrupted the moment. What if you had finally stopped waiting? They opened your profile again. Not searching for clues. Searching for permission to hope. There were recent photographs. New places. Genuine smiles. Instead of feeling threatened, they smiled softly through tears. You had continued living. That was never something to resent. It was something to admire. Because real love should never ask another person to pause their life indefinitely. For the first time, they understood that reaching out was not about reclaiming the past. It was about honoring the truth, regardless of where that truth might lead. Then something unexpected happened. As they prepared to press the call button, the phone displayed an old draft hidden inside the notes application. The title read only one word. Tomorrow. Curious, they opened it. Inside was a list they had written months earlier. Not a plan for work. Not reminders. A list of everything they intended to tell you tomorrow. Tomorrow I will explain why I've been distant. Tomorrow I will stop pretending I'm fine. Tomorrow I will trust them with the whole story. Tomorrow I will choose courage. Every promise ended with the same word. Tomorrow. Your soulmate let out a quiet laugh that quickly dissolved into tears. Tomorrow had quietly become months. Months had become seasons. And the truth had remained trapped inside a future that never arrived. Not anymore. They deleted the list. Every unfinished tomorrow disappeared with a single tap. Only today remained. They took one steady breath. Their thumb finally moved toward your name. This time, nothing interrupted them. The call began. One ring. Their heartbeat raced. Two rings. Every possible outcome flashed through their mind. Three rings. They almost ended the call. Then, someone answered. But it wasn't your voice. A calm, unfamiliar voice spoke first. Hello, may I ask who's calling? Your soulmate froze. Every carefully prepared sentence vanished. The room became impossibly still. The stranger spoke again. I found this phone while helping them organize some things. They stepped outside for just a moment. Your soulmate couldn't breathe. The stranger continued gently. They've been sorting through old memories today, letters, photographs, conversations they never quite finished. Silence filled both ends of the call. Then the stranger said one sentence that neither of you could have anticipated. I think, your name is written on more pages here than anyone else's. Before your soulmate could answer, footsteps approached in the distance. The stranger quietly whispered. I think they're coming back. The phone shifted hands. A familiar breath reached the other side of the line. Neither of you spoke. Neither of you needed to. Because after all this time, the silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like the final heartbeat before a truth that could change both of your lives forever. My beloved child. Neither voice rushed to fill the silence. For a few precious seconds, the distance that had once seemed impossible to cross disappeared without either of you saying a single word. It was not because every wound had suddenly healed. It was because the truth had finally arrived where it had always belonged, between two hearts instead of inside one frightened mind. Your soulmate was the first to breathe deeply. I don't know if I deserve for you to stay on this call, they said quietly, but I couldn't let another day pass with you believing something that was never true. You listened. Not because forgiveness had already been decided. Not because the past no longer mattered. You listened because, after so much uncertainty, honesty had finally taken the place of silence. I thought I was protecting you, they continued. The more I cared about you, the more afraid I became that my unfinished life would become your burden. I convinced myself that walking away was an act of love. Looking back, I realize I never gave you the respect of making your own choice. The confession was simple. There were no dramatic excuses. No attempt to rewrite history. Only responsibility. For the first time since your paths had separated, every sentence carried the quiet strength of someone who had stopped hiding behind fear. You closed your eyes as memories returned, not the painful ones that had kept you awake, but the gentle moments that had quietly refused to disappear. You remembered conversations that lasted longer than either of you intended. You remembered encouragement given during difficult seasons. You remembered the feeling that someone had truly seen you, even if only for a little while. Then you answered with words neither of you expected. I wasn't waiting for perfection, you said softly. I was waiting for honesty. The other end of the line became silent again. Not with fear. With relief. Because those words unlocked the final door they had kept closed inside themselves. They admitted everything they had hidden, the responsibilities that overwhelmed them, the doubts that convinced them they were not enough, the nights they almost reached out but allowed fear to win at the last second, and the countless times they replayed your voice message, wishing they had trusted your kindness instead of their anxiety. As each truth came into the light, something remarkable happened. The past did not disappear. It transformed. Moments that once felt like rejection suddenly revealed themselves as misunderstandings wrapped in unspoken fear. The distance no longer looked like a lack of love. It looked like two people standing on opposite sides of the same wall, each believing the other no longer wished to cross it. You smiled gently. So all this time, you whispered, we were carrying different versions of the same story. Yes, they replied. And I was wrong. The words were not spoken dramatically. They were spoken peacefully. Because real change rarely arrives with noise. It often enters quietly, when someone finally has the courage to become completely honest. Neither of you pretended that trust could be rebuilt in a single evening. Some conversations would still need time. Some questions would still deserve thoughtful answers. Some wounds would still require patience. But for the first time, both of you were walking in the same direction instead of wondering why the other had disappeared. Your soulmate reached for the old handwritten letter once more. I don't think this letter belongs in a drawer anymore, they said with a faint laugh. It belongs in the past, you answered warmly. And whatever comes next. I'd rather hear it from the person writing the next chapter instead. A peaceful silence followed. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of understanding. Outside the window, the first light of dawn began touching the horizon. The long night had not ended because every problem vanished. It ended because the truth finally found the courage to meet the morning. Some stories are changed by extraordinary events. Others are changed by one honest conversation that arrives later than expected but not too late to begin again. If this fictional story found you today, may it remind you of something timeless. Fear often speaks first, but truth lasts longer. Honest words may feel difficult, yet they build bridges that silence never can. Whether you are waiting for answers, carrying regret, or hoping for reconciliation, may you find the courage to choose openness over assumption, compassion over pride, and hope over fear. May your heart be filled with wisdom when difficult conversations come. May peace guide your decisions. May healing reach every place where misunderstanding once lived. May you recognize the value of honesty before another precious moment slips away. And may your path be surrounded by grace, strength, and the quiet confidence to walk forward with love. Thank you for sharing this journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a message of hope today. Leave a comment below with the word truth if you stayed until the end, and let us know what part of this fictional story resonated with you the most. Until next time, may peace go with you, and may every new chapter begin with courage instead of fear.